Good evening and welcome to the Town of Sandwich Finance Committee meeting for March 17th, 2026. Tonight's meeting is being aired on Sandwich Community TV and will be available for replay. I'm calling our meeting to order. Let's begin by rising for the Pledge of Allegiance. And our regular announcement, a reminder to turn on our microphones and speak clearly so those at home and those with us in the auditorium can hear us well. I'd like to begin and invite anyone from the public who may have some thoughts to share with us to come forth at this time. Seeing nobody. Minutes, we do have a couple of sets of minutes to review. Any comments on the first set from, I guess it would be the third? I know, Nancy, you made a comment, sent me a comment about including who voted no or who was absent. I don't know that we've done that all the time on approval of meeting minutes. It's been done sometimes, but not all. It probably hasn't been done consistently. So perhaps we make a rule that will do it going forward, and I can ask Susan to update those votes accordingly in both sets of minutes. So any other thoughts on the minutes from March 3rd? Seeing nothing there, can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Crystal, second by Matt. Any further discussion on March 3rd minutes? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any noes? Any abstentions? None for that. March 10th meeting, they weren't in here, were they? No, so
They were not.
Just March 3rd, so, okay. Very good. With that, we can move on. So before we begin, I want to note that the agenda includes a discussion of the Upper Cape Tech budget. The superintendent had planned to present tonight, but after some meetings this week with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the superintendents from Bourne and Wareham, DESE may be adjusting the cherry sheet and enrollment numbers among the towns within the regional district. Because of that, he felt it would be premature to present his budget this evening, and it's not clear to Bud at this point when this may be resolved and when we might get a final assessment number. So with that, Bud and I exchanged some emails and we replaced that agenda item with a review and discussion of the draft list of the annual town meeting warrant articles. So all of us on the committee are aware of what's likely to be on the final warrant, and we'll cover this after the CPA presentation and discussion. But do you want to add anything on Upper Cape?
Yeah, I would just say, from what I know about the situation, apparently there's a zip code that's shared between portions of Bourne, portions of Wareham, and some students who actually live in Wareham were inadvertently assigned to Bourne. So there was a correction made, and then there was further students identified where they might be in question, and so I think they're trying to resolve that. But that, changes percentages and all the rest. There weren't any questions on our students, and I asked Dr. Maruschak, and I don't think he has any issues. The way it works is Upper Cape Tech reports back to the local district because they're required to track all students between kindergarten and senior year in high school. So,
Thank you. Matt?
Does that have potential to impact some of our numbers, or will it just?
I mean, not much. For example, when they found the first issue, which I believe involved 14 students that Bourne had been assigned that went to Wareham, that's what changed our assessment by that 16,500 that we talked about last week or the week before. My understanding on the next group of kids, it's about a dozen students. So I guess the two questions are like, I guess, because we're trying to figure it out ourselves. Like if you know, it should be around 15,000 if something happens similar than before. But if our enrollments haven't changed, maybe it won't change at all. I think what gets confusing is each town gets a separate amount of money from the state for their educational costs. And I think in general, Wareham probably gets the most of the 5-member communities. So hypothetically, if Upper Cape gets more money from the state, that could change the foundation budget and all the rest. So that'll be interesting just on how it resolves. And we don't anticipate any huge change in ours, like up or down, but I think roughly we were thinking if our assessment went up, we still have a little bit of projected balance. If it goes down and we save money, then maybe we like increase the excess levy reserve by whatever that change was, but we'll see.
And just so folks on the committee know, one of the questions I did submit to Superintendent Forget was around the amount of increase over the last year at 6.39%, and asked him to come prepared with a fairly detailed explanation of that, because that's significantly higher than both our town's budget increase and the school's budget increase for fiscal '27. So I think it would still be worth having him come at some point to explain why that number is what it is. So, Jackie.
Ed, I was also wondering if we could put forward a question about whether he is planning to increase overall capacity at the school, and whether that's through building new buildings or classrooms or whatever, and what we might be able to then expect if the same percentage of Sandwich students attend.
I did ask a question on the line of that, but not specifically about are they planning to increase physical capacity than to take on more students, but more take us through the selection and process of acceptance of students. So I'll follow up with that question. Anybody else have any correspondence, announcements, or the like? Seeing none there, Bud, why don't you just take us through any updates
Sure,
on current budget?
Yeah, just super quick, no changes since last week, so nothing to go over. As Ed had mentioned, I thought it would be helpful just because, as you guys know, who've been around a while, like a lot of the warrant articles, it's not all in the base budget, but a lot of the information in our binders go into other articles. So I just thought it would help maybe if we walk through those, where we should have a little bit of time at the end where Upper Cape isn't coming in. And I wanted to make sure, like, as your names are printed, how you'd like them or if you want anything different. But we still have a long way to go before that's finalized. So thank you.
Very good, thank you. Moving on. Tonight we're joined by Leanne Drake, who's our Director of Community Development. Leanne's going to take us through the proposed funding through the Community Preservation Fund for several projects. The fund, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's supported through a community-wide property tax surcharge of 3% and qualified for state matching funds. The town specifically allocates these funds towards 4 key areas: open space protection, historic preservation, community affordable housing, and outdoor recreation. So with that, Leanne, take us through what's proposed for this year.
Okay, can everyone hear me now? Okay, that sounds a lot better. Thank you for having me here tonight. Again, Leanne Drake, I'm your Director of Community Development, and I'm also the Community Preservation Act Coordinator for the town. So before us is 3 different applications that were approved unanimously by the Community Preservation Committee. The first one is for $755,300 for the restoration of the Sandwich Middle High School tennis courts. Currently, there are 6 tennis courts at the facility that have experienced a lot of wear and tear. Their most recent upgrade was in 2018, which was also through Community Preservation Act funding, in which they were resurfaced. The project proposes the 6 tennis courts being resurfaced using potentially post-tension concrete to 4 tennis courts and 2 pickleball courts. The 2 pickleball courts are being added with the acceleration of the sport within our community. As part of the project, they're hoping to increase community use on these courts. They now have an app system in which you can see different playing times, so when they're not in use by the children and young adults at the school, that then they could be used by the wider community. And as part of this request, there will also be significant ADA upgrades for those with accessibility issues. So the Community Preservation Committee unanimously supported this article.
Any questions on that one? Bob?
Probably not to you, probably to Bud, but the courts were repaired and resurfaced in 2018. Do we ever sort of get feedback on or provide feedback to some of our vendors? It seems to me that the useful life of a tennis court can't be this short. And so if they were repaired and resurfaced in 2018, what do we do to hold people accountable for the quality of their work?
I'm 90% sure the work in 2018 was just the top, the top painting, and if there were cracks, some crack filling. The major repairs were done the last time the town had a road bond, like 20 plus years ago. So I think the base is probably pretty good. It might be just some surface type issues that they addressed. I'm not as familiar with what the school has done with them.
It does relate to the type of material they used originally when they went forward with the tennis courts. The plan is to move into post-tension concrete, which will give a much longer lifespan and better maintenance. It doesn't crack with the surface. The surface won't crack with weather components. So it should give more of a 10 to 15 year lifespan, whether the previous materials they were using was only giving 5 to 8 years. So this is at 7 years where it needs substantial upgrades.
Nancy, did you have one?
I just want to confirm, did I hear you right? We're going from 6 tennis courts to 4 plus 2 pickleballs, so we're losing 2 tennis courts, so that must not be a problem with the schools?
Correct, yeah. That's from what we heard from Dr. Joe Maruschek. He felt that 4 tennis courts was enough to sustain their programming, and then also to include pickleball as another activity.
And where's the app that people can see the usage?
From what I heard, it's right on their website that you can download that app, and then for any of the facilities that the public are allowed to use, you can check the times and schedules, and that is regularly updated.
So on the school's website?
Correct.
Somewhere? Okay, thank you.
Jeff?
Leanne, just sort of a follow-on question to what Nancy asked. Relative to residents having access to these courts, do you know if the courts are open on weekends for residents to use?
Yes, that was something that they said that they would expand to. I don't know that it currently is in their setup, but the hope was that they will be open later in the evenings and on weekends. There are tennis tournaments that take place, so outside of those times, they would be open to the community use, and they will be adding additional lighting for evening play.
So currently they're not, but the plan is to open them weekends and evenings. And do you know what's holding that up? Is there anything holding it up? They have to wait for something, or just a matter of doing it?
I think they're just in such disrepair.
Okay.
They're trying to just preserve what is currently there for the use of the sports.
I see. And if there was like a neighborhood group that wanted to grab a block of time, say to have a neighborhood event or something, is that allowed? Do you know?
I don't believe you can book time. I don't believe you book time through the app for use. You just see that it is open and you have to go and see that it is available. It's either blacked out and booked for the school use, or it's vacant.
Okay, so you're not, so it just shows that it's open, you can't then book it. So if it's open and you show up and others are using it, some towns, you know, they limit, if you're using a court, I was just recently at one, it's kind of interesting. I was mentioned to you earlier that I was out visiting our son and grandson, and the local courts, we went over and played pickleball. The local courts have a system where you take a ball and you put it, and they line the balls up, and you play, you get so many minutes, and then it rotates through. Do we have a similar system, do you know, by chance?
Not at the schools, but I believe we have a booking system at the Center for Active Living
Okay.
for the court.
And then my last question, we're adding 2 pickleball courts, which, do you know if there's a league currently at the school, or they're planning to have a league? Is that why they would like to have them there?
I do believe they're planning to create a league.
Okay, and the ones that are over at Center for Active Living, those, do we know if those are heavily used, and 2 more are going to be great?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Okay.
Those are consistently booked to full capacity.
Wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Hi. You mentioned lighting, but I don't see anything in the project scope about lighting. How is that going to happen?
So that came up during the discussion with the committee, just regards to evening hours, how that would operate, if they were proposing any lighting. I think there is a line item in their capital request for an additional part that would go to this project, which would include lighting and such other features. They weren't requesting the full amount of funding through the CPA.
Is there lighting there now?
You know, I'm not
I
sure.
don't think, I didn't think there was, but so it would be all new. So, okay, thank you.
Anything else on that project? Next one, Leanne.
Okay, so the next project is from the Town of Sandwich Recreation Department. It's 2 recreation projects. The first one is the resurfacing of a basketball court for $394,240. And then the second is for sand renourishment at Peters Pond, O'Chris Cove, and Snake Pond, and that's for approximately $111,135. So both of these projects are a little bit long overdue. For the sand renourishment project, previously the Department of Natural Resources had a line item in their budget whereby they did this annually. We have not replenished the sand there for quite a number of years. So we're hoping to be able to do that starting this summer into the fall season. And then for the basketball court, that is in disrepair, similar to the tennis courts in the school. The basketball court's heavily utilized. And then they will also be moving to a post-tension concrete, which would provide a longer lifespan for the court itself.
Questions on that project? Nancy, go ahead.
Do we have to get any kind of permits for the sand, like the ocean, where it's freshwater?
Yes, there will be permits with the Conservation Commission in order to place the sand on the beach. And then there's a certain grade for sand that would have to be purchased in order to put that on the beach. And then we would also be looking at requirements for 521 CMR for accessibility for those individuals to be able to access the beach.
Do we see any obstacles to getting those permits?
Nope, they're regularly given by the Conservation Commission. You know, we've seen it with the recent storm. We have a lot of permits currently in front of us for sand on Salt Marsh Road and North Shore Boulevard.
Okay.
So it's something that can definitely be permitted.
Thank you.
Leanne, do you know why the rec department would have taken it out of their line item budget?
I believe it was natural resources to begin with, but
Oh, okay.
no.
I mean, I
more.
think it was a pittance. It might have been 5 or 10,000. It wouldn't get you very far each year. And I'm not, I'd have to go and ask them.
But when they took it out, did it sounded like it stopped?
I don't know if they
Auditions?
always use the money for that, honestly. Yeah, there's a lot of expenses in that office, and it probably wasn't just singled out as that.
Ah.
It could just be property maintenance, things like that.
Anything else?
I do.
Go ahead, Crystal.
So Leanne, so looking here, you know, at the, like, for instance, Snake Pond here in the middle, Is there anything besides, sand replenishment that could be done, year after year, or, something, because, these, problems, I use that pond, and I do see that that's, every year, it's, more of the same, even with replenishment. Is there any other, anything else that could be done that could kind of prevent that?
In regards to the sand or the water quality?
Not the water quality, like in here where, like, it's, the roots are, coming up and the water runoff. Is there anything that can be done to stop, that from kind of, not receding, but, like anything that could be put there to kind of like block it, or anything that would go into preservation?
Sometimes beach plantings for beach grass can help, establish less sand migration into the water. So that is something that we could look at to try and preserve the sand and to keep it in place. But typically, just sand moves. So usually for those types of things, it's maintenance of just continually depositing sand. There's little we can do on this end of Massachusetts when it comes to any type of hard infrastructure, when it comes to our water bodies.
Okay.
I would just add, I know over the years, DPW has improved the drainage on Snake Pond Road. Like, I think it's really the larger storms that crest over the sort of Cape Cod berm and some of the drainage systems, and that's when we get washouts, when it's like a really big storm.
Anything else on the rec projects? Okay,
Okay.
and one more.
So then the final project is for $50,000 for the creation of a ropes course at Camp Linden. So they previously used to have a ropes course that then fell into disrepair. So over the past 2 years, they've been working to rebuild another one. So the full price of this project is $169,000. They're about 1/3 of the way through the project. They have the poles up, which was approximately $9,000. This was all leveraged by volunteers. They've also received a grant for $49,000 with the Kelly Foundation. So the request from the town is for $50,000 to complete this. It would not be ready for this summer season, but potentially for the next summer season. There is a large group of Sandwich school children that attend this camp, and some of our lower income families also.
Questions on that project? Go ahead, Nancy.
What other towns contribute and how much?
I don't believe any other towns contributed.
So we're the only town.
Correct.
So the 169, and they want 50,000 from us. And where is the rest of it?
They received a grant
Right.
for $49,000 with the Kelly Foundation,
Right.
and then the rest was leveraged from volunteers.
Oh, so it's equal. It's not money given. It's
Like some in-kind
equivalent
services, but
in-kind.
and some fundraising.
okay. And just curious, have we supported this before, where it's a private group?
Yes, we have supported nonprofits or educational purposes. So typically through this, we would want to see some type of restriction. So for something like this, we would enter into grant agreement with them, have measurable deliverables before we would entertain funding. It's always done as a reimbursement style grant. Make sure all inspections are done, funding is not given out until then, and then we would ask council whether or not we could put a recreation restriction on the property, so that it would be held in perpetuity, that it would be used for recreational uses.
So we wouldn't have any liability just because we contributed?
No.
All right, thank you.
Jeff.
I wanted to go back first, Leanne, back over the numbers. So phase one, as I'm reading in here, it said a total of 51,385. That is complete. Phase two, which I hope to start in early 2026, it says they've raised 5,000 to date. This is what's in here. And the remainder of this phase has been requested from the Kelly Foundation. So I read that to say they've made a request, but they haven't received it yet. Is that correct?
At the time that they made the request was at our first meeting, and then by the time I spoke with her to say that the award had gone through, they had received the grant.
Okay, so they do have the grant from Kelly. Okay. And then phase three, which they say is 51,845, they're asking for 50,000 from Sandwich. What is the rationale for only asking Sandwich? You know, as I read through here, it says 800 campers were served Of that, if I remember correctly in here, the numbers are like 90, around 90 are from Sandwich. So Sandwich is, it's 15% of the population, yet we're being asked to contribute everything. And it doesn't appear that any of the other towns have contributed. Do we know if they've been asked? Do we know why they haven't been asked? Or if they have been asked, why they declined?
I do not believe they were asked, and we were the first community that they reached out to. And I believe they reached out to us first just because they are within the community bounds.
So, because it's within the community bounds, they're asking us for all of it and not going to the end of the towns. I served a short, as you know, a short time on this, on that committee, and typically, we look for others to contribute too, not just the town. And we used to tell that to individuals that came in, that we would look to them, to seek funds from other communities, especially when other communities benefited from it. Was that asked of them by the committee when this was reviewed, or I'm struggling with the fact that we're going to be asked to fund it all, and why other communities weren't asked to step up.
Yeah, the other members of the Community Preservation Committee did bring that up. So they discussed the in-kind services from the volunteers and then the fundraising efforts. At the meeting, they said they had raised $9,000 in funding at that point, which was a little bit different to the narrative. And then just from soliciting this grant and then eventually receiving this grant, they felt that they had not put all of their eggs in the CPA basket and that they had searched for other monies available, but that did not include going to any additional towns.
Thank you.
Any other questions on Camp Linden? Seeing none? Oh, I'm sorry, Nancy.
General, you said in the beginning it was 3%. Aren't we 2% now?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
2%.
2% surcharge.
Okay.
I just wanted
Thank you
to
for,
clarify that.
okay, thank you for, yeah. Again, we can go up to 3, I
Yes.
believe, but,
We used to be 3,
and we used to be 3. Oh, yes, and the 1 was for the WIF.
the WIF, yeah.
Okay. All set. Thank you very much, Leanne, for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Well, can
Oh, I'm
we-
sorry, Bob.
I don't have questions on these proposals per se, but I've got some sort of general CPA questions.
I would say,
And
Go ahead
maybe,
and ask.
maybe it's, I'm not sure to who, so you can field them as we go, right? I guess first a comment, and I appreciate that it's allowed under the CPA rules. But we spend a lot of money, CPA money, on school projects. We've got capital requests, we've got pending capital requests, we've got capital requests that are formatted as CPA requests. There's a lot. So I think it would be interesting to, and maybe we combine it with the review of the independent capital improvement assessment presentation that I think this committee is going to get around the schools. A sense of, in its entirety, our capital spending on school projects would be really helpful. So that's a comment. I guess in terms of a question, so the CPA is preservation. It's open space, it's recreation, it's preservation, and it's housing. Both chiefs, police and fire, have commented to this committee in public hearings about the fact that staff travels a long way to get to Sandwich. And so part of my thought process when I heard those comments was that perhaps this community has an affordability issue. The last time we had a presentation about the proposed Public Works Fire Department project, included in the fire department project, if I'm not mistaken, was sleeping quarters specifically intended to be available to staff who commute from long distances, and it would help facilitate their lives and their availability to this community if we dedicated some funds towards dormitories. So again, maybe not CPA, it is CPA related. I think this committee should hear about initiatives to source and support housing. It seems to me that it would be interesting to get a breakdown of CPA spending over time and how it's broken out, recreation, open space, preservation, housing. I would just make the observation, I know we've got an affordability issue here. And the chiefs have commented on it, though not directly, indirectly by how many miles town employees are driving to work in this town. So I'd be very interested, not tonight, not to put anyone on the spot, but I'd like to hear, in combination with CPA monies available, what we're doing about those issues. And then I guess my other observation here would be, as I heard these presentations, and as I hear other presentations before this committee, I continually process information that many of our capital requests are to rebuild and to fix things that have been neglected over time. That maintenance is not routine, and it's not regular, and it's not budgeted for. And some of the discussion here tonight reinforced those perceptions of mine. And so I would also like a better understanding of maintenance and capital requests and how much we're really dedicating to maintenance around town assets. So I appreciate the time. I'm supportive of these requests, but I think they raise bigger questions. And I would appreciate them getting some time and attention in a public hearing.
And to those points, Bob, I submitted several questions like that to Bud and Bill in anticipation of our discussion tonight about the overall budget and follow-up questions or themes that have come from our discussions this time. So one of those questions related to that issue of affordable housing, there was a question that I put in there about what initiatives do we have around that. And then also recently, Bud had originally put on the warrant a potential question around the seasonal communities designation, which at this point, the Board of Selectmen have decided not to include that, but an aspect of what that could bring to the town was affordable housing for employees. Is a part of how the funding that you collect from that type of initiative then flows through. So perhaps, I don't know whether you want to cover those points now or...
Absolutely.
Leanne's our expert on both
Okay.
those topics, so, and then can I just say one quick thing? If you've never been down to Oakcrest Cove, go down the hill to where the rec facility is, and that summer fun program is run, or super fun program is run. If you've ever seen the courts there, it's fair to say, like the basketball court, I believe it was also striped for 2 tennis courts at the same time. It gets like constant, for lack of a better word, free have fun play, and it's nowhere near as structured as the courts up at the high school, where there's my guess is when those were put in, it was literally like someone just kept paving the parking lot and paved an area for the basketball court. And we've done very minor resurfacing through the years, mostly repainting to patch it up and stuff, but I think getting a better surface on that will help a lot. But it's I just don't want you to be left with the impression that it's the same as the tennis courts at the high school. But if you go down and take a look, I mean, it is used all the time. It's a fun area.
If you'd like me to start, I can kind of just detail our housing strategy from the last kind of decade to this point, and then what we're doing moving forward. So we absolutely have an affordability problem in town. And some of it is infrastructure based, a lot of it is land use and zoning policy based. We have put rules and regulations in place that stall and slow down and eradicate development. So we have been working in the last decade to notice those and try to unweave and unravel them while still being sensitive to the community, the type of community we want to be, and the environment that we're in. So there's multiple different kinds of affordability, and one of the biggest things we need to do is diversify our housing stock. We are primarily single-family homes. We have very little rental units. We have about 377 deed-restricted affordable units, which only puts our SHI, which is our subsidized housing inventory, at 4.54%. So we haven't even reached 5% of our housing stock deed-restricted affordable. And now when we talk affordable, it's what we call capital A affordable. It is 30 to 80% of area median income for Barnstable County. Some of the newer terms that are coming in is workforce housing or attainable housing, which would go up to 250% of area median income. So we're kind of focusing on both of those at the same time. Chapter 40B, which is the state statute for affordable housing, that brings in a lot of development, which we've seen in the last 3 years that we're going to have. We've 3 different 40Bs, either permitted, in construction, or will be permitted within the next year. All of those will count towards our SHI because they are capital A affordable. So that will bring our numbers up to 8.54% for SHI. But at the same time, we're trying to get attainable housing and diversify our housing stock. So what we first did was look at our current zoning practices, and we went through and added inclusionary zoning. So every time you do a development in the town of Sandwich, you have to include some type of affordable unit at workforce housing or at attainable housing standards. So if you're doing apartments, one of them has to be affordable, or 2, depending on the ratios of what it is. We worked with developers to make sure that this could actually be done, because the previous numbers just made it so uneconomic that no one was availing of any of our zoning bylaws in order to actually build these units. So we started off with cottage colonies. They're seasonal. We made a provision that you can turn them year-round. There's an affordability requirement as part of that. Then we moved on to top-of-shop zoning. So basically, any commercial business, you can now put apartments on top of shop, basically, and then be able to have affordable units also within those. And then we moved on to, we moved on to our accessory dwelling units. So that was in 2020, the town's first go around with accessory dwelling units. We made huge progress. We ended up amending that bylaw, I believe, twice to make it easier for homeowners to avail of that. Currently, to date, we have about 38 new accessory dwelling units in town. For each one, we do a pre-plan. They are all being used by families to age in place and for families to return. So we're seeing a lot of people that want to stay in their home, but they need a smaller space, build them, move out, their family and children moving back within the house. They are not to be used for short-term rentals or seasonal rentals. There's restrictions on that, so that's prevented them from being turned over to the short-term rental market. So we have seen quite a large number of development in that sense. We also, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the merger doctrine. So the state has this law whereby if you own 2 parcels of land in common ownership and they're undersized, they merge. And so you're rendering one lot unbuildable. We've petitioned the state for years to try and lift this because it's a barrier against housing. And as part of their Affordable Homes Act, we supported the legislatures in doing that. So now if you have a square footage of 10,000 square feet, you're now unmerged, and you can build what's called a starter home. So it caps the square footage and the number of bedrooms to try and just make it more affordable. And through that, we've unlocked 40 more buildable lots within town for starter family home use, which we would be able to use. Then we adopted the newer Affordable Homes Act ADU bylaw. It makes it easier again to every lot in town can now have an accessory dwelling unit for purposes not for short-term rental, not for seasonal rental, but for long-term rental use or for family use. So we are seeing another uptick this year with those going through permitting. And then most recently, and I will say what probably our biggest achievement was we're starting to look at local action units. And so this is outside of Chapter 40B, but it's still a state program. It still goes towards your SHI count, but it's where the local municipality crafts a zoning bylaw where they take control and over the type of development they want to see. So that most recently passed in November, and it actually went into effect last Monday. So I'm already in discussions with developers about how we could potentially utilize that to get more affordable housing. It's probably the biggest one that we've done to date, because what we did is we looked at it comprehensively of, okay, so we don't have wastewater, we don't always have great infrastructure going into some of these lots. How can we utilize this, but also get the density we want, not have these large apartment buildings, and look at, you know, smaller neighborhoods, you know, 4 units per acre, shared driveway, these, what we coined the term like a pocket neighborhood, some affordability to it, some market rate, because it has to be economic at the same time. And then also as part of that, we did adaptive reuse. So we have a lot of underperforming commercial space in town. So when we did a study of identifying which ones we could potentially use for affordable housing, there was no mechanism beyond Chapter 40B, which caps profit, to be able to actually turn these into dwelling units. So we did add adaptive reuse. This is all through a special permit process, so there's some local control. We get to do site design, you know, plantings, landscaping, neighborhood concerns as we go through the process, but we would be able to use adaptive reuse then in any of these underutilized buildings to be able to create more housing units. So that's kind of where we are right now, and then the path forward is look at the Seasonal Communities Act. I will just say, from doing the zoning changes most recently, they take 2 to 5 years to shake out, and you never want to do too much too soon, because you can change the character of a community very quickly through land use policy. So you always want to make sure, as it's going throughout the development process, that we got it right. There's no unintended consequences, and we don't have to suddenly react to something that, you know, didn't feel like it was thought out enough. So, you know, I had said to Bud, I don't think we should go for Seasonal Communities Act designation right now. I don't think it adds any benefit or value to where we currently are. A lot of what they are proposing, we have something in line with that. And Sandwich has some unique zoning aspects with non-conforming lots. So when we talk about tiny homes being unlocked on undersized lots, we allow full single-family homes on undersized lots, so it doesn't necessarily help our community. But we're also looking at housing trusts, working with Sandwich Housing Authority currently to identify additional lands that could be used to expand their affordable housing. And just following along from all of our housing production plan. We're still within our housing production plan. So we have about 3 more years of that before we would need another update. And then, of course, our LCP. So as part of this, you know, for things going forward, we're also just looking at the impact of short-term rentals onto our community, and to see what type of, you know, reasonable regulations we can impose there, just to, you know, maintain all different kinds of housing types, because we want to diversify and you know, make our land work for us in terms of our tax base and our economics, while also preserving our natural resources. So it's kind of about finding those pockets, adding a little bit more density to them, a little bit more infill development where the existing infrastructure is and where further future wastewater planning is, and then leading on from there. And that was very long, and I talk fast, so if you have any questions.
Can I just add, Ed, that Leanne and I think Heather participated in a Zoom meeting that the state had about seasonal communities. They hadn't even finalized the regulations the day we had the Zoom, which was about 2-3 months ago. And then I'm going to ask Leanne to explain it because I don't want to explain the wrong thing. But one of their biggest concepts is this so-called tiny house, which could go on any size lot. But I believe in what they were telling us was that tiny house has to be the principal use on that lot. So, you know, we have 1.5 acre zoning, and you put a 400 square foot tiny house on it. It's, to me, like that accessory dwelling unit and the other work we've done makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. For the tiny house bylaw they're proposing, the concept and the regulations aren't aligned. So the concept is they're saying any underutilized lot that does not meet the current zoning requirements could now have a tiny house on it as a way of unlocking these undersized lots. However, but they're saying you wouldn't create this through subdivision, but the regulations don't say that. So essentially you could then create this through subdivision. So there's this loop that they need to close. They've reopened the language again in the law to vet this out, because it's just, they're not working well together. But as I said, in Sandwich, we have this provision in our zoning, which is very unique to Sandwich, that says any lot that was created for single family purposes shall always retain its buildability, unless it was held in common ownership. So that was where the merger came into play. So that's why we always see development of these homes on 5,000 square foot lots, you know, 10,000 square foot lots. We don't have lots that are buildable that aren't built on. So we would have to create our own, overlay district for tiny homes, which is something we can always investigate, but it would be outside of the seasonal communities, and we would not need that designation in order to do that work.
Jeff?
I wanted a few things. One is, Leanne, thank you for that. I've had the opportunity prior to this assignment to have worked with Leanne for a long time, ever since she first joined Sandwich. We're very fortunate to have Leanne. She knows this stuff inside and out. The other comment I would make is that when we started down this road, it may not seem it today, but there was a lot of pushback. The word affordability, sometimes folks look at it and, they get queasy because they think about, 40B kinds of things. So we started slow. I think Leanne had a great idea there to start slow. And then over time, I think the momentum's been picking up. And Sandwich has been noted a few times for having our ADU, when we had our ADU before the state revised it, was noted as one of the more advanced ADUs on the Cape. So in the cottage communities and so forth, everything that's been going on. So there's a lot I think that people don't know. I was sitting here listening to everything, Leanne, you were going through and saying, wow, I lived it, but I didn't recall all that. And it may be good somehow to get that information out there, because the town has done a lot. The affordability issue goes beyond just employees having to travel a long way. The service industry has employees that are traveling a long way to come and do service in the Sandwich. I mean, affordability is an issue across the board. It doesn't matter if you're a public employee or a private employee. Housing is expensive. But Sandwich has done and continues to do quite a bit, and I just want to applaud again Leanne and Bud and the rest of the staff supporting it. But we've been very fortunate to have her, and she really knows this stuff inside and out. So, thank you.
Thank you for very thorough. Seasonal community's been around for a while, in Western Mass, and I think maybe one town here on the Cape, on the Outer Cape. Are there any experiences or lessons learned from them at this stage that you're aware of?
This is a new designation. I think what you might be referring to is some of those communities took on some of these endeavors outside of the designation, like seeking for the taxing of homes over $1 million. Both Nantucket and Chatham went through that process outside of the seasonal communities, as did a community in the Berkshires, I believe. But the seasonal communities, as it's currently defined, is a newer designation. Once you become designated through town meeting, you have 2 years then to implement some of the policies and procedures that are a must, and then others that such as that tax, you can decide whether or not you want to opt in.
Any other questions on affordable housing? Leanne, one other question that came up ahead that you might want to address is around the local community comprehensive plan. It's been a couple years since that was published. Can you just maybe give us a quick update on where things stand, how progress has been made on that?
Sure, absolutely. So we hit our first year of implementation last August. At that time period, I spoke with all the department heads that were action item leaders and prepared a report to the select board, which was given in October. So it details, and it's on the town website, it details every single action item, and then a status report on whether we've achieved it, how much longer it will take us to achieve it, any barriers that we have to the success of it. I will say that it's been fantastic. I'm looking forward to year 2, because this was really a new process for us to go through with the department heads, to kind of have a roadmap to what we want to see for land development, growth, conservation, preservation, and then managing our cultural assets. So I think next year, when we go through this exercise again in August to prepare again for the select board, which we will do annually now, we'll see even more progress within that field. But the cycle's working well, so this happens in August to present to the select board in the fall, just ahead of capital planning and before the select board do their long range plan, because it was thought out that this should feed into all of the plans so that they are all cohesive and flowing in the same direction.
I would just add, Ed, that if you look back at that FY25 and beyond plan, almost everything in there was somehow addressed in the LCP and vice versa. And I think by getting those things in place, we pretty much got 90% of it accomplished within 2 years. Didn't even add anything for the third year. I think that's positioned us really well for the future in terms of like internal structure of town government and putting a few extra dollars, not a lot, in some areas that really needed it. So,
Thank you. Anything else? We have a wealth of knowledge in Leanne here tonight, I think we've discovered, so thank you again. Appreciate your time.
Anytime. I'm sorry if I
Yeah.
was long-winded.
No, perfect. Thank you. As we mentioned earlier, Bud's going to take us through a review of the financial-related articles we'll be voting on to whether recommend during our next meeting, and they'll be then presented to annual town meeting.
yeah, so I put in front of everyone's chair just the cover of the warrant and then the index of warrant articles. Again, I'm going based on what people want, how they wanted their names on the warrant. If anyone wants anything different, let me know. If you look on the back of that cover sheet, I'll just quickly go down these. Article 1 is just the report of town officials, i.e. accepting the annual town reports and then giving a brief overview of the long-range plan, which the select board has had on their agenda the last few meetings, and we're working through that. Pretty much all of these budget articles where I highlighted numbers in red would typically be ones you'd ultimately vote on. And Bill and Caroline Caravana, our town accountant today, got me a few of the ones that we were waiting on the calculation, so I'll just touch on those as we go down. So the overall budget that gets voted in Article 2 is just over 102 million. All this is matched by the budget binder information and everything we've talked about. The enterprise funds, as the committee knows, we have 4 different ones in town, so it's the recommended budget for public cable access, the transfer station, the golf department, and the marina. Again, I know a lot of this is old hat, but we do need to vote our revolving fund appropriation limits each year. There's some nuances. If you're not changing the maximum amount, you might be able to avoid it, but town council always just says, why don't you just vote it just so the public's aware? I don't believe, with the exception of the recreation department, we're looking at changing any of those revolving fund limits. Just so everyone's aware, it's very atypical. The vast majority of receipts that the town brings in go to our general fund, so they're found in our local receipts, not in a revolving fund. But you're allowed by state law to establish revolving funds for certain programs, several in the school department, but the ones in the town are mostly focused on recreation department programs, Center for Active Living programs, and the theory behind it is you don't have to upfront the money to run the program. You can charge the cost for that. The money comes in from the participants, and that's how you pay the instructor or whomever runs the program and some of those costs. So I think all told, we've probably established about a dozen different revolving fund accounts, and then we set a maximum limit. There is a catch-all if we're having a really good year and we're going to exceed that. The select board and the finance committee can each vote to allow us to exceed a limit. We've never had to do that, but probably the biggest one by far is the rec department. If you know all those huge programs they run, especially in the summer. Capital budget, that's the total amount, not the net when you subtract it off the ambulance fund, golf receipts, and marina receipts. Right now, and Bill can correct me, he and I spoke earlier today, we're about $250,000 in the hole on snow and ice. A couple of vendors that we know we used haven't gotten us bills yet, but we had anticipate that we'd be over by about $300,000. There's a couple of different ways we could handle it, and I think what we feel best about is not asking a reserve fund transfer. Let's save that if we need it for other smaller things. Let's try to find a way to cover the deficit before we close our books this fiscal year. Technically, we could carry it over into next fiscal year, and it comes right off our recap sheet. Doesn't even have to be voted at town meeting. But, we just prefer not to carry forward a deficit. So our intent is to transfer up to $300,000 to cover that shortfall. I know people have a lot of down limbs on the side of the road. There's some pretty significant trees still. I would just like, as Paul highlighted last week, we have over 150 miles of public road. I know they're making progress because we've gotten a couple of outreach from the public just saying, thanks, you got to my subdivision, it looks great. But it's taken a while to go around with all the down trees and limbs. So ultimately, I believe we're going to designate a site where people can bring debris free of charge, and then we would pay to chip it up at the end. So it's probably a stretch to say that those chipping costs, even though they were caused by the storm, are snow and ice related. So we may have to see how that looks as we get closer to that 300,000 number. So Chapter 90, the state wants us to vote that every year, even though we don't know how much we're going to receive. We don't have to put a number in, but we vote it every year. The school cellular lease on top of the high school, those funds from a vote at town meeting years ago get set aside in an account. They have to be appropriated by town meeting, and the funding can only be used for the exterior fields and facilities at Sandwich Middle High School. So the balance in that is $38,802. Interestingly, our lease is expiring with Verizon. Heather knows more about this than me, but Verizon has been speaking with the school. We've been involved a little bit only because our town council is familiar more with some of the procurement laws than the school attorney would be. So we've been trying to help them, but it looks like Verizon would prefer to do a longer term agreement, not necessarily a lease, but possibly an easement. And so our town council is working on language that we would have to vote to enable that to happen. Beach renourishment funds, you may remember many years ago, there was a vote at town meeting that 20% of our beach parking account funds from all beach parking locations, not just near the saltwater, get segregated and then get appropriated for use on it's a pretty broad statement, but it's like beach improvement and renourishment efforts. So for this year, it's just over $106,000. Sandwich Promotions Fund, again, another special vote from town meeting years ago. So our rooms tax comes in, and that includes short-term rental taxes as well. Formulas are applied. And to make a long story short, the Visitor Services Board gets a certain amount, the Sandwich Chamber gets the same amount, and the Canal Region Chamber gets half that amount. So the numbers for this year are an all-time high, although last year was pretty high too. We were around 60,000, but a little bit higher for both the VSB and the Sandwich Chamber, and then the Canal Region. And so they use it to promote the town for other projects, etc. I know Dave Mason was in, 2 or 3 meetings ago, all the different things we have going on with WIF. So we have a standard practice every annual town meeting, whatever the balance is in the WIF, appropriate it so we can keep going on those projects that we've talked about, the engineering, etc., the school work. So the balance right now is 1.6, so that would appropriate that so we can access it. CPA, the primary article, it does 3 things. It establishes the administrative costs for the upcoming year. We've had the same $75,000, I think, for 20 years. If that money doesn't get spent, it goes right back into the CPA. It doesn't go to the general fund. I don't think we've ever exceeded that. We've come close many years ago when we had to do some appraisals and stuff, but we usually return most of that. And then we have to allocate 10% of the projected revenue for the upcoming year for the 3 purposes, first being open space and rec, they're combined, affordable housing and historic preservation. So this year that 10% estimate is $190,000 each. And then we have to make our debt payment from other projects that we've approved in the past. So that's $505,000. I was just looking at this when I was coming up with that number. Believe it or not, I think in 4 years we won't have any old debt that we're paying of CPA. So that's good because more would come in for the other purposes. And then the 3 projects that Leanne just went over, the rec facilities improvements, the school facilities improvements, and then the Camp Linden recreational improvements. Article 17, I'll explain this as simply as I can. It's a very complex state law on how power generation facilities are valued. and they actually get valued as personal property, not as real estate or commercial property. They get valued as personal property, and by having that designation, they get assessed the same way that the contents of a second home would get assessed. And by state law, they depreciate every year. So I'll probably ramble a little bit on this one because I've been out of practice to explaining it. So there's 3 units down at Canal Generating Facility. The 2 old ones, units 1 and 2, are housed in the large green buildings, and they connect with the large stack. And then unit 3, which is the quick start newer unit, is outside of those buildings, the smaller one with the smaller stack. So we originally had, I think, a 15-year agreement on units 1 and 2. Then we did a 7-year agreement. What's been proposed now, working with JERA, who are the owners of the power plant, is a 3-year agreement because of that depreciation. For the last seven years, the value of that part of the plant has decreased by 8% a year. And so there's been that trend, all based on law, all based on experts that we've had look at the contents of their facility, all sorts of stuff. And we have a special energy attorney. And so the current tax agreement expires at the end of this fiscal year. So a state law says by doing a tax valuation agreement and a payment in lieu of taxes, that has to get voted at town meeting. So several months ago, our Special Energy Council worked with JERA. We came up with a value that would basically be 3 years, first year level funded, and then do the same depreciation that we've had for the last 8 years for years 2 and 3. We sent that to them about 6 weeks ago, and we're just waiting for them to get us the okay on the on signing off on that. So a couple things I want to talk about. The entire agreement would be printed in the back of the warrant. We would explain how we came up with the numbers, what it does. Couple things that I know as the Finance Committee you'd be most interested in, and I'm just going to speak frankly. Those units 1 and 2 went in the late 60s, early 70s. They're not called online very often, but for their vintage, they're very efficient. So they have to be maintained roughly at bubbling at like 50% capacity, because if they get called online by the state or New England Power Grid, they have to ramp up, and it takes them several days to get all the way to 100%. This past year, because of the frigid weather that we had, they've had a record winter compared to like the last decade. So in the scheme of things, they've done well in terms of the plant's maintained, it's operated, it hasn't broken down. So all that is good, but it doesn't matter how it's valued because that's set by another part of state law. And I'm not talking out of school, and I know they'd be comfortable with me saying this. In the long run, those 2 units will eventually go away. And whenever I've had these discussions with the power company, which is, we probably meet every, I would say 4 to 8 weeks. I always say, when those go down, would you please take down the eyesores? And they fully acknowledge and know that. And at one point we were at a meeting, I would say in the last year, and we said, like, honestly, do you think those facilities will be there in 10 years? And I don't think I'm talking out of school. It's highly, highly, highly unlikely. So that's one part. I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I don't think people realize the value that we have in that facility, and that if we want to talk about future economic development and ways to expand our tax base, so this will bring some clarity, and people may remember it. When Unit 3 went in, it had the same tax value, I think, of 25 Stop and Shop plazas between Stop and Shop, CVS, the banks, all that on 6A. It dwarfs anything we ever could approve or would approve, or that the Cape Cod Commission would approve. And so we try to be their best host communities that we can be, and we're always encouraging them if they have future development plans or redevelopment plans, like we want to be there to support them. If it requires zoning changes, which the zoning is pretty extensive on their industrial site. A lot of the stuff they could almost do by right, but still need certain permissions, especially at the state level outside of us. But when that new Unit 3 went in, I don't know if you'll remember this, but Ed Childs was the director of assessing then, and when he and I worked with our special energy attorney, who's still active, you capture the new growth. And if we followed the old model by state law, 20 years from now, their value would be down here. So what we did is, and they agreed to it, we started the value up here. Because they had spent all that capital money, we dropped for about 4 years pretty steeply, and then we go up on their value 3% a year. So when we get done with year 20, we're a little bit higher than it was when we established. So whomever is in our chairs, we're about 8 years into it, so 13 years from now, they're going to be starting from a much better negotiating position than if you just followed state law. So I think our hope would be if any redevelopment happens on the site, we want to follow like a similar methodology where we capture the growth because that's critical to the tax base, but then we try to find a way to help them fund it more longer term, so down the road it keeps increasing instead of decreasing like units 1 and 2. And I think it's telling that, we said, we'll do as long of an agreement as you want, and they said, no, we want a 3-year agreement. So I think the town could be hearing something from them in the next 2 to 3 years that could help our tax base significantly down the road, but those are massive things that they would have to permit, and they'll need a lot of help from all of us to get through, but also will make the environment better because those 2 older units operate on pretty low grade fuel compared to what a new unit would. And one of the last improvements that was done there before the new unit 3 was to do a massive natural gas pipeline expansion underneath the canal to their facility. Unfortunately, and I think it was through the Algonquin Pipeline Company, 100% of that natural gas is being used all the time. So there's no extra capacity. So that's a long-term need as well. Try to get more natural gas into the Northeast and onto Cape Cod, because that will help burn cleaner fuels for the future. But certainly what they would be permitted to burn in terms of fuel oil would be much cleaner than the old units, what they were designed for. So, I think if looking ahead, like without a doubt, that's our biggest economic development opportunity as a community, and hopefully within the next 3 years, we hear more about what their plans are. That's too much information, but, and if we don't get that signed agreement back in time for town meeting, we'll have to do it at a future town meeting. It doesn't hinder us from sending out a tax bill because there's an agreement between the parties on what the value would be. So we're not worried about that, but it would be nice to just check that off.
Got it. Jackie?
I'm just curious, so some of the redevelopment, so one potential idea would be natural gas. Are there other?
I think what they've talked about, and I think they'd be honest, like that new unit, quick start unit, has been very successful. It's used quite a bit. I think they may be open to something similar, and they haven't been. This is just like, I'll just talk about the industry in general, like especially to provide a backbone and support to all the green energy that's happening. I think they might, just like any other bigger provider, the town of Medway is very similar to Sandwich in terms of what we've had in the past and what it looks like it's going in the future. So, for example, Medway has had a couple of battery storage projects.
Matt?
Bud, you mentioned something interesting, that the value of Unit 3 is roughly the equivalent of 25 Stop and Shop plazas. And I think there's a misconception among our residents that Sandwich lacks in industrial and commercial tax revenue.
Yeah.
And I think it's, and I'm going to get this wrong, but I believe we have the highest valued commercial property per capita on the Cape, if I'm not mistaken.
I'd have to check that, but you might be right. Like, I know the total percent of our taxes that comes from residential homes is fairly high.
Mm.
But we have such a huge like if you look on that, when Ed Childs used to do it, but when Ben Steich does the tax classification workshop with the select board, if you remember, there's that weird spreadsheet and it has all the different types of
Yes.
property. Like there's a section on personal property that looks huge. That's because that's the power plant.
It's maybe I'm misspeaking with
Yeah.
commercial property. 'Cause
Yeah,
we're
but
it's
you're right.
personal property.
Yep.
But I think it's important for residents to recognize that we could approve all sorts of commercial development around town. Number one, we don't have the land, and number two, it would make such a minimal impact on residents' taxes
Yeah.
versus what we're able to do with the canal power plant.
I mean, if they look at some redevelopment opportunities and also some new development opportunities, like that's something we need to be careful of. And I looked this up because I was trying to prep for town meeting already. And I don't know if this will surprise you guys or not. So when that Unit 3 went in and we captured the new growth was about 3.2 million. And look how good we've been about not using that excess levy reserve. Like what we've proposed for next year is 3.75. So, 8 years has gone by. We haven't become dependent on that. We haven't spent that on recurring costs. We did spend it on, buying 106A and fixing it up with cash. So that wasn't debt. And then we issued debt for the Center for Active Living in the library. We're having no problem paying that within 2.5, and we still have more excess levy. Now, you guys know better than anyone, there's a couple of accounts that we're concerned about, health insurance, a couple of other things down the road that as that goes forward, we might have to tap into that. But it's sort of amazing, and it's not by coincidence that 8 years later, we have a bigger excess levy reserve than we had when that plant went online.
Bud, you sound optimistic about the redevelopment, but if plants 1 and 2 do go offline and they decide to do nothing, what does that impact?
Yeah,
anything?
that would impact us in the sense
Negatively.
that they wouldn't be paying the bill. It doesn't decrease our levy, but it just means that that burden would get spread out amongst everyone. It's sort of like what
everyone
you
across
yeah,
across
everyone.
the town.
But it's the amount that units 1 and 2 are paying. I think it's under $1 million a year, so it's not like what it used to be. Whereas at the end of that 20 years, Unit 3 will be paying like $3 million,
Which then goes back to
which that helps us all. That
and which goes back to your comment of
Yeah.
be a good host community.
be a good host, and if it improves our environment, and Lord knows we're all used to the eyesore. If there's ways we can do things down there that would benefit everyone, I think that's an opportunity we shouldn't pass up. And the company is based out of Japan. They have some really interesting thoughts long term, which cutting edge type things down the road. But I think even in the next like 5 to 10 years, we'll be there'll be some things that we'll be considering.
And I'll go back to a question I had on the easement with Verizon, the possibility of that. Is that going to potentially increase their contribution to the town over the 38.8? Heather. Chair swap again.
First of all, we would have to issue a request for proposals. The State Procurement Act requires us to do that. Our expectation is if we issued a lease agreement, Verizon would offer us somewhat less than we are currently earning on that lease agreement on an annual basis. They're offering an alternative, which would be a lump sum payment, which is somewhat less than the total of the annual payment over the duration of the lease, but is a large number in the close to between $500,000 and $600,000. That seems more appealing to the schools in terms of the revenue to help them support the outdoor athletic facilities at the high school. So that would be the RFP we'd move forward with. We'd need to receive an actual proposal from Verizon to execute that. Our lease does expire in about 18 months. So we're at the end of that term and we need to do something. So it's not great news, and I think that's been, and I've talked to our colleagues across the state about their experience with leases for telecommunications, and it is similar, that they're just not seeing the revenue. We've seen it ourselves, so we haven't seen the response from the telecommunication industry for locations that we have available. The locations that are of interest to them aren't zoned for the use, so it is a challenge in terms of the revenue.
And by saying no, then for ourselves
No,
in
it's not a
terms of
reasonable
cellular?
response for public safety, for accessibility, for the telecommunications industry, and they know that because the cost of the systems that they're maintaining are more expensive than they might do elsewhere, and they more than likely would not do that on public land because of the processes and the expectations of local government.
Matt?
So is it fair to say they're strong-arming us a bit by offering
that?
us a lesser lease amount in turn?
It's a
offering-
significant value in a long-term easement that would allow.
When you say long-term, are we talking about in perpetuity, or are we?
It says 40 years in perpetuity. We're working with town council on the language. It should be in perpetuity. An easement generally is.
Yeah. And so it would be a one-time payment.
Any other questions on the warrants? Crystal?
But on number 11, the Canal Region Chamber last year, is that, correct me if I'm wrong, that's 3 towns?
It's Bourne, Sandwich, Wareham.
Okay, and then, and last year we had talked about that we were paying the highest
Yeah, I don't think the other towns make an annual payment to them.
at all.
No. But this was a special act the town meeting adopted,
Okay,
so we're stuck with it.
and are we stuck with it for a length of time? Was there anything that was in that,
It
or is
was
it just kind of
indefinite.
forever?
Yeah, it was indefinite.
Okay,
So it would take a citizen's petition to,
You'd probably have to like dissolve it, and then you'd have to go through the legislature to unenact it or get rid of it. I don't know how they do that. But
yeah,
yeah.
I mean,
And there's a lot that the Canal Region does for the town. I mean, not disputing that. I think there was a reason that they were identified to get half as much as the local chamber, because the local chamber probably does a little more.
anyone else? Okay. Thanks for taking us through the warrants that we'll consider for next week, I believe. So tonight's agenda also had planned so that we together as the Finance Committee can take time to consider each other's thoughts on the budget that we've been reviewing over the past several weeks and that the Board of Selectmen has recommended. I went back through my meeting notes. I listened to on some parts of the recorded meetings, and then gathered from a number of you questions and open items that you saw in advance of tonight's discussion. So with that, Bud or Bill, do you want to address some of those questions that we sent ahead?
Sure. Want me to go on a couple of them, Bill, and then I'll let you do whatever you want to do, or you want to go first?
Absolutely. Ed, is there a particular one you want to address first?
No, go for it. I'll let you guys go in whatever order you want.
I know in the Upper Cape one, just to reassure everyone, we did ask them when they came in to be ready to talk about, there's been talk about the lottery system, and I believe the state, my understanding is the state has tried to discourage regional towns from doing lotteries. So I think that would be good to hear from, a school that deals with that directly. But then also the similar question that came up earlier and sort of tied to that second bullet that we had was, what are the overall projections in terms of future enrollment? Like if Upper Cape is thinking about increasing enrollment, like share that with us. So we did tip them off that when Roger would come in, that he'd talk about those.
If he's not going to come next week, can we get answers to these questions, though, perhaps?
I think we could try to, yeah. I think Bill and I can reach out to him to see what we can get. It'll be curious because when you looked at Roger's email saying how he couldn't come tonight, I think he's waiting on some numbers and things to come from the state, and that's where I worry that could take longer.
But
So
yeah, and I think even the percentage
right,
started at
right.
five something. It went to 6.3.
Right.
I think it's whatever number we end up with. It's
Yeah.
going to be a couple points
Yep.
over R3.
Yeah.
Both of our
Yeah.
budgets. So I'd maybe phrase it up
Yep.
in that manner.
Okay.
Not maybe to the specific 6.39, but
Yep. We'll endeavor to get
describing the
some answers on those that we can bring back if he can't be here. On the CPA items, I know Leanne touched on some of those about the LCP and what we've done. Affordable housing did an unbelievable job explaining that. It's sort of one of those things that you keep chipping away and then you don't realize how much you've chipped away, that's a huge accomplishment for the town. And to think that a couple years from now, we might be close to that 10% goal would be a big achievement. And then Bob's question about school maintenance, we should look at that. I will say that every year, either I go or someone goes with Leanne to the CPA meeting to try to talk to the committee in executive session, just to remind them as members turn over that there were a couple of open space goals that the Conservation Commission had years ago, the vast majority of which have been achieved, but there's a couple more out there. So we just remind them in case those become available, like that's beyond our control. But we do try to keep them in the loop on some of those matters, because if you think, we really haven't spent a lot on open space recently. From the CPA, we focus more on some of the other goals. Budget follow-up questions, like Bill, do you want to take that on the police
Yep.
overtime?
Sure, yeah, I'll take that. So we had a question in regard to the current year status of police overtime. Through the end of February, police overtime was at 59% expended, which is right on schedule to where we would like them to be at the end of February. So right now they're in pretty good shape on that one. Next, we had a question about the 80% of the cost to operate the transfer station that's recovered from sticker fees and bag fees. I believe the question was why 80% and why not 85 or 90%? Really, the 80% number that we gave, I was just pulling actual revenue data directly from the FY25 end of fiscal year. So there are other revenue streams for the transfer station. For example, they do have some like recycling revenue and bulky items revenue, scrap metal revenue and those sort of things. But when you did the actual math, when you added the permits and the bag revenue together, it came up to exactly 80% of the transfer station revenue for FY25. I can keep going on. Is that okay, Bob? Or I'll keep moving on.
Yeah,
Ed,
sounds
I'm sorry.
good. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, sure. So at the next page, there was talking about, can we take a look at the impact the town's budget of, what's next and cost side by side. I think we're certainly open to that, and that's something that we could take some guidance from the committee, and that's something that we could look to in the future on that. The next was about senior.
I'm sorry, Bill.
Yep.
How do you maybe envision that happening? A subcommittee or working group?
Yeah, I think that's probably something we could work together, Ed, on. I just think, guidance is exactly what you're looking for, how many people you wanted involved. We're certainly open to getting you the information that you requested, so I'm willing to help you in any way, shape, or form you want with that one.
Okay. I will say there's a couple of hot button issues that I think collectively, 2 to 4 of us have been talking about for a while. So that might be another example. Like one thing that we've been talking about lately is OPEB. Trying to do a little bit more research. What are some unique things that we could do down the road that wouldn't be as painful? So that might be the type of thing, again, if we could get a couple people just to brainstorm with us, and I think anything that we could look at to sort of lay the path for the future, even if we're not drastically increasing our funding right now, but other opportunities might exist down the road, we should look at that. So.
All right, so I'll continue on. The next bullet point was in regard to the senior real estate tax discount for volunteering. Is that program utilized enough? Is there room for more volunteers and more publicity about the program? So we work on that program with Susan Morancic and also Ben Steich, our Director of Assessing. We generally have about 15 volunteers a year that do that program. There are some years where we fill that program in its entirety, and there's other years where we do not. Those funds, that program is paid for out of our overlay funds in the budget. And then what happens is after people go through the program and they do the necessary hours, then we then have their tax bill. We use those monies then to offset the cost of their tax bill. So generally those people make about $750 each. We do probably have a little wiggle room to increase it, but not much. The overlay, if you remember last year, a couple changes for veterans and what have you, that really hits abatements on both excise bills and exemption on property tax bills has kind of put some pressure on our overlay account. So we have a little wiggle room to move there, but not a lot there going forward. The next bullet point was on the cost of the shellfish program. And the value of the license fees collected. So I did talk to our DNR director yesterday, and last year we had 215 permits issued, and that revenue to the town was about $7,250. There was a question in regards to the shellfish bed used to be open on Sundays only, and then a second location was added. What was the cost for that second location? And speaking with her yesterday, she mentioned that the cost was really just 4 hours of labor for that. It's for the shellfish constable, and that shellfish constable is paid minimum wage. And I know on the next bullet point was seasonal communities. I know that was, Leanne did a great job talking about that. And I believe the last bullet point there was just, again, a follow-up on how we would, I'll just read it. How do we follow through on suggestions about determining truer non-CAPE comparisons of the town and school budgets and metrics? Again, I think, we'd be happy to do that. We have some internal ideas that we've talked about for years, towns that we've compared ourselves to years, but we could certainly, look into that in the future as well. So we'd have no problem doing that as well.
That one might actually tie in naturally to the earlier one where we put a small group together to talk through what's next.
Yep, I think that's a great idea, Ed. Yep.
Just a quick one on that. If we know,
Go ahead, Jackie.
if we know the criteria that we intend to measure ourselves with other towns by, it's a great AI application.
No, I agree, and
Yeah.
I did run it through. I've done some work on that,
Yeah.
and I did run it through ChatGPT with a few criteria that I thought was important, and I really did it first round to around the question of tuition assessment, and it came back with a group of towns that were not on the Cape, and I said out of the 351 cities and towns, it came back with a variety of different towns. So
So it might not take a ton of committee
choosing the
time.
right criteria is going to be important as well, Jack.
And you can enter criteria with the DOR, and it spits out some communities.
Yeah,
as
and
well.
that's
So
that's
we
what it
have-
used
yeah.
as its source.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I would say there's probably, if you include us, there's probably 4 or 5 towns on the Cape that we're very similar to that we should keep including. And there's probably, 4 or 5 we should include out there. I think it'd be a waste of time if we added 20 from off Cape, so but that wouldn't be hard to do.
good enough. The last one, maybe just to cover, is the capital, how they come together. And really around, this was centered around the use of putting annual maintenance into the capital budget type question.
Sure, and I'll read it just so everyone has it. Provide an explanation on how the capital budgets come together in municipalities versus general business, i.e. annual repair and maintenance being capitalized versus handled as an expense. So, each facilities department, both the school and the town side, has their own operating budget that they use to maintain town buildings and school buildings as well. What we did, probably 10, 15 years ago now is we started adding money into the capital budget for both the school and the town. And historically, it's been $150,000. This year, we were able to move it up to $185,000 for the school. The reason, really the big driver for that and why I think it's an excellent idea is because of municipal finance. If you go back, if an operating budget is not fully expended by June 30th, it reverts to free cash. And so what happens is when we're able to put things into capital accounts, that does not happen. So you're able to hold on to that money across fiscal years. So, I'll give you an example of what happened at the school last fiscal year. And this is part of our capital budget. This year, they had inside of their operating budget, they had $75,000 put aside to do some school flooring work that had to get done at the end of the school year after the kids were out of school. There was an issue with the vendor, and they were not able to get that project done. And what happened was that $75,000, because it was not expended by June 30th, and they didn't have a vendor in place to encumber the money, that money then reverted to free cash. So what we did is, in order to get the schools back that money, we put it on this year's capital list so they could spend it on that flooring project that they had originally planned to do. So by keeping this money in capital, they have the flexibility that if costs or projects go over cross fiscal years, they don't have to worry about it. That money's sitting in that capital account, and it's there for them to be used and to be spent accordingly on facilities. Again, those monies are approved not only by the finance committee, the select board, and ultimately town meeting. Those capital funds go through audits. They get approved by the DOR, and they get approved by the town's auditors as well during our normal audit process. Generally speaking, those capital accounts are usually spent within a year, maybe sometimes into the next year. I have never seen an event where those capital funds sit in there for 2, 3, 4 years. I think we've spoken ad nauseum about the maintenance issues throughout town. We need those monies. We don't have the ability not to spend those monies. So it really has worked out really well. I think it's benefited both the town and the school side to have those capital accounts available to them. And that is how we do, that's how we add. So we had both operating funds and maintenance, and now we also have capital funds and maintenance. And again, it's really to just try to assist both the school and town side facilities directors. And that's how we handle that for cap.
I would just add, I think 2 years ago, Heather and Brian Schlegel, our facilities director, did a really great presentation with the committee. I think it was in June. And I don't think I'm speaking for people, but I think everyone was really impressed, the level of detail, how much regular maintenance is done to try to keep it to those more normal things. And then I know Brian showed some of the reporting things that he has in a database and how he monitors. And I believe the intent is to have him come back later this year just to give you another update, just so you can see what he does regularly. And I know we're also working on our own internal facilities report, similar to the one that the school just issued. And it's quite a bit different just because our buildings are so much smaller and, for the most part, newer. So,
And Brian came forth with
Yes,
some recommendations that then got followed through on.
he did, yeah. I remember he wanted I think 40,000 more, and we added that
We
to his
added some.
budget. And I think Brian would say this. When we go with our operating budget, we're always worried, what's going to hit the fan unexpectedly. And I know he purposely sometimes saves money through the first half of the fiscal year in case some bigger things don't go wrong. Then he feels more confident. I'm going to start spending more of that money. A great example from this past year, it was just a bad year for septic issues. There was a septic pipe that went out the back of the library, which, if you've ever gone in the back entrance, that's where the paved, sloped, accessible walkway is. And then it goes to the septic tank, and where the pipe entered the tank just dropped, so it was no longer functioning properly. And so, it took a while to repair it, had to rip up, the area, the cement, fix it. Those things happen. You got to fix it. It's not from lack of maintenance. It's just a pipe finally went. And so, Lord knows how long that pipe has been there. But, that I know that was an example that he gave us, that I had all intent to do this project, and then that happened. And for the next 5 weeks, that's all I focused on. So that can be difficult.
Jackie.
Yeah, I think the spirit of the comment, and I hope I'm reflecting this accurately, is to adequately fund, operating budget maintenance so that we can avoid capital expenditures in the future, or extend the life of whatever it is. So. And I do think 2 years ago, we raised this issue this exact same issue, and really encouraged, as it was especially the school, I think, to put in more money in regular maintenance. I think they did do some of that, as you said. And, you know, I could argue that the carpet should have been a capital maybe to begin with. It doesn't even sound like a maintenance item, but I do think that we need to, continue to make sure that that is the case and that we're adequately funding routine maintenance. And, I hope that that is, that's kind of the spirit of the issue.
Bill, I did copy Dr. Mershek copied Dr. Mershek on the questions and stuff, and included some school ones. I don't know whether he or his team responded to you folks on them. I didn't hear back anything at this point, or don't know whether you know any of the answers to any of those particular points.
I myself did not hear back from Dr. Marushek in regards to any of those bullet points.
All right, then we'll follow up with them, and then if we get answers for them, or perhaps if he can come next week and also take us through the maintenance assessment, that might be a good thing to try to accomplish for next week as well. See what he has to say on that. How about thoughts or questions just to take us through, maybe consider things that you're considering, that you want other members to consider as we wrap up the budget season and come next week to the likelihood that we'll be taking votes on the warrant items. Does anyone have any thoughts they want to share along those lines? I'll go down the line. Crystal, anything? Nancy? No. Matt, anything?
The only one that intrigues me right now is the telecommunications easement. I think I'd love some more information on that, because something feels off. But
Okay. Kevin, you're good? Jackie? Okay. All right. Bob? Nothing? Jeff?
With respect to what we're going to vote on, I guess, is my comments there. Respect to the capital, and Bill and I exchanged emails. Through the emails, we discussed this idea of annual maintenance funds covered as capital. Both from my own experience on the private sector side, I don't have any municipal sector side. I don't support that practice. I think it leads to some issues. I think it's one of the reasons we have deferred maintenance we haven't addressed, because people keep funds thinking of something else, and then they know it can roll into the next year, and it can set bad behavior. I've seen it on the private side. So it's just a dialogue that Bill and I had. I also questioned some of the rationale for some of the capital items as not being very thorough. Doesn't mean we don't need it, it's just, it's not very thorough. Some of the stuff says we're gonna replace a vehicle because it's old. Well, what I really wanna know is, what's the maintenance been like? You know, a vehicle that's old can still be very functional, and the cost of maintaining can be very low. And a vehicle that's 3 years old, we have to get rid of because it just hasn't withstood the test of time. So some of the rationale, I found it shallow. And I don't mean that as an insult to anyone. It's just, it could have been better. It needs to be better. When I asked about, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, can I just, maybe to that point, I'm wondering, Kevin, if that type of question or detail is maybe not covered in the documents that we see, but is covered at the committee meeting on capital?
For vehicles, yes. Heather does a very good presentation on all of them. I have always thought we have way too many vehicles, and she convinces me why we need them. She'll talk you through how bad one of the current pickup trucks is, and this one won't pass inspection, and maintenance exceeds what it costs to get a new one. So yeah, at the Capital Improvement Planning Committee, Heather does walk through all the vehicles. For some of the proposals being shallow, I'm not sure I agree with that, because definitely not in the vehicles. The one I do, and the school, the women's locker room, the plan, there should be a plan for it, and I'm sure they have a plan on how they're gonna start addressing it. But it was $75,000 to get started. And it needs to get started, which is kind of where we went. We couldn't say, put it off another year till you tell us how you're gonna get started, because ultimately they're gonna need a lot more money than that. But at least that gets them going. I think that's mainly it.
So if I appreciate your comments. I haven't seen all that detail. I'm simply sharing with you where my thinking on the capital. I can only respond to what I'm given to review, and that I'm asked to review and so forth. One comment I was going to make, jump to the women's locker room. If that's an example, I don't support capital projects where there isn't a plan. And I've told someone else, a plan can be one piece of paper. It can be half the paper. But there should be something on paper for a plan, how we're going to spend the capital funds. Some plans should be more detailed than that. Some should be less. And I'd like to see the plans in support of capital requests. And I don't think we have plans in all places. When I asked, and I respect the work that everyone's done, and don't take my comments as wrong, as an insult to anyone, I'm just commenting on the material I've received and what I'm looking at. When I asked about this vehicle that they want to get, four-door vehicle, I forget what it's called, the ATV kind of thing. To me, when you get something new, you always want to ask yourself, what's the mission? What am I trying to serve? Why am I getting it? And I asked them that, and they had a good reason, right? In crowds where they can't get an ambulance in, they want to be able to get into this because they have to move somebody to an ambulance. But when I asked about a stretcher, he said, ooh, I would never use it for a stretcher. So what that says is the only mission it'll serve is someone who is mobile that we want to move. If we have to immobilize them and we can't get the stretcher in, they can't get the ambulance in, we have no way of immobilizing them, getting them out with this solution. So I get a little concerned that we're not quite there yet of what we really need, and we should be looking at it closely. So I think it needs to be more on the capital from what I've shared with me. And there may be, and I've asked these questions, and these are the answers I've gotten. So, that's where I'm at the capital. And like I say, I think, the example Bill gave of the tiled floors. Well, replacing a tile on a floor to me is not annual maintenance. That's a capital project. So it should be capitalized, and it will go over multiple years. And yeah, you get the bid back. But there is maintenance stuff that I think shouldn't be capitalized, and it's going to get deferred if we do capitalize it. So it's different philosophy. And like I said, Bill and I have exchanged emails on this as we've gone forward. So we'll see other items. From what I've seen my first year here in the committee, I'm comfortable with. I've asked a lot of questions, and I appreciate all the answers I've gotten. There is a question I'm waiting for from the school. It won't affect this year's voting from my point of view, but it is a long-term question, and that is, it wasn't do we need 3 schools, but it was the utilization of those three schools for required activities and non-required activities, because we do have to ask questions, especially since, the school committee presented, I think it was $90 million for phase 1, 2, and 3, if I remember the number correctly, for their facilities. And 90 to me is a big number. School committee didn't think it was that big a number, but 90 million. And that's going to be, if you looked at that, as phased out over 10 years, I think. On top of that, sewers will come in within 10, I think, right about there. So a lot of money that's going to be asked for in the future. So I'd like to understand better, when can we go to 2 schools? Should we be thinking, can we do it? I don't know, because then we could cut out some of those costs. But that doesn't affect this year, but that's one question I'm still waiting to get an answer. But with respect to voting on this year, capital bothers me. The other one is just the CPA project for Camp Leiden recreation improvements. I think it's a mistake for Sandwich to pick up all the costs. There are many communities that benefit from it, and I think they should be looking at other communities and for assistance. I think it's too easy just to come to us and say, oh, give it all to us. So, my thoughts.
Very good. Thank you, Jeff. And just a reminder that as we vote next week, what we report in the warrant is how the actual vote ended up. There were years where that wasn't as transparent in terms of our vote. So we've asked the town to include the specific numbers of how we vote on each of the line items for the articles in the warrant. So with that, Bob.
Can I just ask one question?
You may.
Separate from this budget that we'll be voting next week. So do we have a sense, is there any likelihood that at an upcoming, not at this, is there any sense that there's going to be a what else asked of taxpayers within the next 12 months? So if we vote this budget and say, this is what we're doing, and I'm generally supportive, and so as it was expressed, so homeowner, if you've got an average value home, which is approximately $740,000, you're getting $250 plus or minus. That's what we're all voting. But my colleague mentioned the schools came around and they put 150 pages in front of us and said 90 million. We haven't heard anything in front of this committee as an update on Public Works project. We haven't heard anything on update of the fire station. I guess I'm just sort of pontificating a bit that I don't want to simply vote this budget and then hear in the next week or month or two, oh, and by the way, here's another project for 70 million, 80 million, 150 million, 90 million. So if we could have, for next week, you're voting the budget and either here's what else or there isn't a what else. I'd like that to be a part of the conversation.
The only one I'm aware of that could go within the next calendar year would be if there was support from the select board on the DPW fire, then that would, they would determine whether or not that went before the voters. But not this May, still being worked on. I think the plan is to have a presentation with the select board in early April, around April 2nd is the date we were shooting for, but we know it's going to take a while.
Very good. Thank you, everybody. Old business. I don't have any old business. Anyone else with old business? New business? I don't have any new business for this evening. Anyone else? Okay, next item is public comment. Any public comment from the few that are in our audience tonight? Seeing none there. Thank you, Leanne, once again for being with us and for all your insights. Really appreciate it. But Bill, Heather, thank you as well. Our next Finance Committee meeting is planned for next Tuesday, March 24th at 6 p.m., where we vote on making our recommendations on the fiscal 27 budget and capital requests, along with the other items that will appear in the warrant for annual town meeting. Anyone else on closing remarks? Seeing none there, do I have a motion to adjourn? Matt moves. Jackie second. Thank you. Good night, everybody. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm sorry, we didn't vote to adjourn. Thank you. All in favor? Unanimous. Good night.
Thanks, Bill.